Follow council staff down the stairs onto Union Street. Please do not use the lifts. If you have any access requirements, please let us know, as refuge and evacuation facilities are available. As the Inspector has mentioned, the session this afternoon will be live streamed. The audience will not be recorded, but if you wish to ensure privacy, the two back rows will be completely out of view of the camera. During sessions, please can those people not participating, please keep noise levels to a minimum. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the hearing session, we've form a structured discussion which I shall lead on, generally following the agenda circulated. I'll invite people to speak at particular times, but if you have something to contribute at a particular point in time, please indicate you wish to speak by standing your nameplate on its end. When you speak, you need to press the button on the microphone in front of you. It's the button at the very front, and then turn it off once you finish and put your nameplates down. Does anybody have any questions at this stage? Can I just ask everyone here for the afternoon session just to introduce himself? I'll start with the council, if I could, please.
I'm Simon Vincent, Strategic Planning Service Manager, Sheffield City Council.
Sarah Reid, King's Counsel. I'm the barrister representing the council.
Tom Finnegan-Smith. I'm the Assistant Director for City Transport at Sheffield City Council.
Gemma Call, Senior Transport Planner, Sheffield City Council.
Sorry, Alison Daniels, Sistra, we're representing Sheffield City Council.
Hey Williams, also at Sistra, representing Sheffield City Council.
Andrew Bradshaw, Director for Consulting, representing Sheffield City Council.
Joseph Webster, Transport Planner for Consulting, also representing Sheffield City Council.
Mike Johnson, Head of Planning at the City Council.
Laura Stevens, Local Plan Team Lead at the Council.
Good afternoon, sir. Simon Jones from National Highways. To my left is Mr. Richard Edwards of JSJV Jacobs, our transport consultants, and immediately behind me, Mrs. Claire Pennells, also of Jacobs.
Afternoon, sir. Adam Key from Norfolk Estates. And it's probably just worth saying, sir, our involvement in this session today relates solely to the proposed new station on our land, the reopening of the Barrow Hill line and all of that, which you're fully aware. Thank you.
Oh, working. All right, sorry, I couldn't see that. Tim Waring from Quad, planning advisors to British Land and Norge, owners of Meadowhall and land around it. To my left is Greg Callahan from WSP. He is a transport advisor to Norge and Norge and British Land. And behind me is Mark Loveridge, who is at Stantec, who is joint transport advisors to Norge and and British Land.
Okay, thank you very much. Just before I begin, I just wanted to, as a point of clarification from yesterday, actually for me really, obviously it's in relation to the employment matter. It relates to the joint regional statement on the common ground that's been signed of May 2023, which is added to the examination website at exam document 4C. My base of my query is obviously the introduction states the base date for the SPG is May 2023. It's on page 2. And I just wanted to check that the tables in the annex, which include a table 5 relating to the employment land requirements and the local plans on page 46, are they of the same base date of basically May 2023? It's just a point of clarification. I've just picked this up. and I just wanted to, it wasn't raised yesterday, but it's basically within the base data. So yeah, okay, thank you.
I'm hoping I can clarify it. Just to be clear, the base date is the base date for the production of this particular statement of common ground. In Table 5, each employment land requirement is as provided at that base date. Obviously, the dates that they refer to are within the table itself, and clearly some of those start sometime before then.
Just for clarity, they were provided at that particular base date. Effectively, that's effectively what you require. But obviously, I know the actual time frames vary, but that's useful. Thanks very much. Yeah, that's okay. Okay, that's just a point of clarification. Thank you. Just the other point, I just want to check everyone's seen the statement of common ground on highways between British Land, Sheffield City Council and National Highways. It's been added to the examination document, exam document 57. It was submitted yesterday and added to the examination library. Could I just make sure everyone's seen that? Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to start. I'm just going to go through the agenda as I've sort of indicated. Going to start obviously with infrastructure. Basically, the first question, obviously, an issue to the council. Are the contributions and time for infrastructure required for development in the council's infrastructure delivery plan? There's various additions, or there's IN01, IN02, and exam. There's an addendum and exam 43. Are they fully justified? Do they clearly set out the infrastructure required to support the growth and delivery of development proposed in the plan?
Yes, thank you, sir. I'll start us off on this one. Yes, first of all, we think the contributions and types of infrastructure required from development are justified. The IDP is based on comprehensive and wide-ranging engagement with infrastructure providers, including the key bodies responsible for transport, health, education and utilities. It's perhaps useful for me to explain what the latest published document, Exam 43, is and how it relates to the previous versions. You mentioned there are a number of the different iterations of the IDP, and I think it's perhaps helpful just to provide a bit of context. So Part 1 of the IDP was published alongside the publication draft plan in January 2023. This was essentially a needs assessment and set out the baseline position in terms of infrastructure provision. Part 2 of the IDP was published in July 2023. This was the original version submitted with the Sheffield Plan. It provided an infrastructure schedule based on ongoing dialogue with expert infrastructure providers. And there's details of that engagement set out in Table 1 of IN01 and also in IN02 and Exam 43. Just to quickly run through the infrastructure providers who we contacted, so there were a number of services within the council, including highways, education and leisure services, the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority in relation to highways and public transport, National Highways, Network Rail, NHS, South Yorkshire Integrated Care Board, Severn Trent Water, Northern Power Grid, and Veolia, who are responsible for the district heat network. Some organisations were unable to provide input, primarily due to resource constraints. So South Yorkshire Police and South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue. However, the view of our consultants who undertook the IDP work was that this is unlikely to significantly be impacted by growth within Sheffield, given the regional basis on which services are provided. There was some initial contact with Yorkshire Water. It was not possible to engage with them beyond the initial contact, although a meeting was held with them shortly after the finalisation of Part 1 to discuss baseline and contextual issues with regards to sewerage provision in Sheffield. And as we've set out in the IDP itself, that's not, they didn't flag any significant issues at that stage. So Exam 43 is an updated version of Part 2 of the Infrastructure Delivery Plan. It really represents a minor update to the version initially published in July 2023, so the version that was submitted as one of the evidence-based documents accompanying the plan. Exam 43 also supersedes a previous minor update, which was published in January 2024, so that was Exam 3E. And that was produced at that stage to reflect the initial outcome of further modelling work carried out as part of the transport assessment. So the transport assessment work has been ongoing over a considerable period of time, and these updates are mainly to take account of that further work and the completion of that work essentially culminating in Exam 43. So the further updates are made to reflect the latest available information for transport infrastructure, and essentially it affects sections 2.3, 3.1 and 4.1 within Part 2 of the IDP. And updates have also been made in the corresponding parts of the infrastructure schedule. So the infrastructure schedule is Annex 1 in each document. So Exam 43, Annex 1 sets out the list of infrastructure projects. The need for these minor updates arose, as I say, from further transport modelling work, in particular completion of the Aimson modelling work as part of the transport assessment, with the IDP confirming the position established through this work, including details of additional highway junctions that are expected to require mitigation. The opportunity has also been taken in this latest version of the IDP to reflect positions agreed with National Highways in a Statement of Common Ground, so that's Exam 36, and also publication of the Sheffield Transport Vision in 2024. That's Exam Document 33. I think our view is that the IDP takes a pragmatic approach and has identified schemes and mitigation only where there is a clear and evidence need based on inputs from expert infrastructure providers. Our consultants, Arup, have layered on professional judgment on top of that. In terms of your question about does it ensure adequate mitigation measures are provided in a timely and phased manner, well, Annex 1 of Exam 43 sets out for each scheme the delivery body, also sets out the funding method, delivery phasing, prioritisation and the source of the scheme. So, as I say, that list is generated by that dialogue with the expert infrastructure providers. Notwithstanding the inputs from the infrastructure providers and bodies such as National Highways, it is likely that other infrastructure needs might evolve or arise throughout the plan period. Many of these cannot be defined yet, so the IDP has sought to flag the need for ongoing review and monitoring, and we do very much see the IDP as a live document that would be updated regularly to reflect ongoing monitoring. We've highlighted in 7.5.2 in our statement about the need for an annual review of the infrastructure. This will be linked to the annual infrastructure funding statement, which we're required to produce on an annual basis. Just to sort of perhaps sum up, in terms of the executive summary, I think in Exam 43 does provide a useful overview of the evidence that the IDP provides. As I say, it has been informed by an ongoing programme of engagement with infrastructure providers. And I think importantly, it sets out there that there are no infrastructure types for which constraints suggest there could be a fundamental inability to deliver the quantums of growth set out in the Sheffield Plan. As I've mentioned before, a range of nearly 100 specific infrastructure schemes have been identified in Annex 1. They've been prioritised based upon the realities of funding them in a scarce funding environment, necessarily reliant upon limited funds available from both developer contributions and outside investment, such as that available from government grant. The Council does acknowledge that not all the infrastructure schemes set out in the infrastructure schedule can or will be delivered, but the schedule will nevertheless form a basis upon which the Council and its partners can make informed funding decisions in the future. There are a number of areas where our discussions with infrastructure stakeholders have identified known or foreseeable needs for future investment, but where it has not yet been possible to establish specific infrastructure schemes. And these are set out throughout Chapter 4 of Exam 43. As I mentioned, we do see the IDP as being a live document and will be continue to be updated as the Sheffield Plan progresses through examination and into its implementation phase over the coming years. I think the urban nature of growth in the plan means that infrastructure needs are reasonably modest and incremental. This isn't a local plan, an IDP, that's having to figure out how to deliver and fund a huge amount of infrastructure. What we set out in the IDP is quite targeted. In terms of costings for future infrastructure, it wasn't reasonable or feasible to establish costs for everything in the current climate, and developer contributions are likely to be limited in some cases due to the realities of viability in Sheffield. But the community infrastructure levy does provide a mechanism for delivering many aspects of infrastructure set out in the IDP. Finally, I think it's worth making the point that the IDP is perhaps an art, not a science, and forms a process where expert infrastructure providers have provided comprehensive inputs and ARP have layered on professional judgment. I think the final point I just wanted to make is that it's worth highlighting that we don't have any representatives objecting to the plan's overarching infrastructure strategy, nor regarding any of the detail on infrastructure outside of transport, and I think we will discuss some of the specifics around transport today. I hope that's helpful by way of introduction.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vincent. I haven't got any further questions specifically on the infrastructure schedule. Has anybody got any particular issues that anybody wants to raise at this particular point in terms of the infrastructure plan or anything Mr. Vincent has raised? Okay, just wanted to cover, there's one or two just suggested modifications to policy ID 1. I think the council said they've agreed to add some definitions at the end of the policy ID 1 on what is essential, required, important, supportive categories of infrastructure. I agree obviously with that suggested in terms of the effectiveness of the plan. I think they've obviously had clarity, so if that could be added to the schedule of main modifications. There's also, I noted in policy in the actual schedule of council main modifications, there's 2 further modifications. RH1, which refers to in the 6th bullet point replacing across the city with elsewhere. Again, I think that is required in terms to be consistent with national policy. And RH2 in the bullet point 1 after the rail freight network insert transport network again. I think that is that would be consistent and would be useful in terms of effectiveness. So if those additional modifications to policy IN1 could be added to the schedule of main modifications, that would be helpful. So I haven't got any further questions on infrastructure at this stage, so I'm going to move on to transport, which is going to be the main body of discussion today. So just actually one further point actually. There's in question, in your response to your question 7.5, the council agreed that the reference to the South Yorkshire digital infrastructure strategy, again in policy ID 1, is not necessary to the soundness and could be referred to in the supporting text. They also mentioned that in terms of the supporting text, it would be useful to add a similar reference to policy C03 on broadband and on telecommunications. I think they've suggested that be added to the end of paragraph 713 of the supporting text. There's some additional wording that's added, I think, in terms of the council's statement. Digital infrastructure will also respond to the objectives set out in the South Yorkshire Digital Infrastructure Strategy 2021. Again, I think looking at those modifications, I think again if they're within the supporting text, I think that they're appropriate rather than within the policy themselves to refer to the South Yorkshire Digital Infrastructure Strategy. I think they're helpful again in terms of the effectiveness of this plan. It should be again added to the main module schedule. is there anything further there, just on those, just obviously there's a few modifications there, has the council picked up on those and got anything else they wish to add before we move on?
No, sir, I don't think there's anything further to add there. I think the modifications are as set out in our statement, and if you're happy with those, then that's very welcome. So yeah, I don't think we've got anything further to add there.
Okay, we will move on to transport now. Yeah, just in terms of just wanted to just have a look at the Sheffield Strategic Transport Modelling Assessment of January 2024. Has obviously been various iterations, but it indicates that certain parts of the local road network within the plan area will become overcapacity with additional transport generated by the plan in the scenarios 2029 and 2039. How does the council intend to address these, and are the mitigation measures that are proposed in the strategic transport modelling assessment justified, and how will they be delivered? So I'll get the council's response. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, to start with, as my colleague Simon mentioned a moment ago, the transport assessment has been comprehensive. It's been a comprehensive analysis of transport impacts associated with planned growth using a range of appropriate tools. The details of the assessment on our local road network and the impacts of that are set out in exam 3F. That covers the report on local road impacts and potential mitigation. We set out that the assessment has been based on a worst case scenario assessment, given that a policy off approach has been undertaken and used in the assessment. That's explained in paragraph 1.1.6 of the report on the strategic modelling results. That's exam 3I. I'll just summarise in terms of the worst case scenario that's been used in terms of traffic demand, that the strategic transport modelling does not include the representation of transport interventions over and above the already committed and funded interventions that the council is bringing forward, nor the introduction of policy proposals and mode shift proposals that we've set out and have adopted within the Sheffield Transport Strategy. So we consider that the model tests described in that report are referred to as policy off tests, and as a consequence we believe that the strategic transport modelling does not capture the likely impacts of the land use policies and interventions that are intended to result in reduced trip lengths, nor do they take into account of the expected increase in the use of public transport or active modes resulting from the improved provision of facilities. So it is a robust approach in terms of our assessment. The need for mitigation was determined by looking at increases in traffic demand flows resulting from the local plan and increases in the ratio of volume to capacity of junctions across the model network. The need for mitigation has been identified at 5 locations on the local road network as a result of the impact of local plan generated trips. Clearly the city has a network that in places is already subject to significant pressure as every kind of major city faces. So in terms of the local plan implications, there are 5 locations. They are the A615 City Road, Wolfrick Road Junction, Station Road, New Street Junction, Mosborough Parkway, Coisley Hill Junction, Lancet Road North, Church Street Junction, which together with Orchard Street, Station Lane are considered as 2 junctions within one location in Outybridge, and Vulcan Road, which has been identified as part of the additional Aimson modelling for the Lower Don Valley. Those those are summarised at table 10 of page 34 of exam 3F in terms of the proposed mitigation at each of those locations. In terms of the, in all cases, the emphasis in terms of managing and mitigating the impact on our network has been to effectively move to an active travel and public transport first approach as new developments come forward through the planning process. Improvements to public transport and active travel will be the starting point for mitigating the impacts on our network of proposed development. Exam 3H, the report on public transport and active travel impacts and potential mitigation, sets out some of the significant potential public transport and active travel mitigations that are proposed in relation to larger sites and clusters of sites, and are detailed in the appendices of that document. So the schemes, we feel, certainly are justified through our appraisal, but in some respects they may not be our preferred approach to mitigations on the local road network.
Just a point, obviously, in terms of the mitigation, the junctions you pointed out, obviously there's a reference in the report you referred to, exam document 3F. In the summary, it talks about proposed mitigation, obviously remedying the local plan at these particular locations, and it talks about the mitigation not being recommended approaching all junctions in the first instance. Just so I'm clear what that means, is it paragraph 7.1.14 on page 45 of exam document 3F.
Sorry, sir, could you just repeat the
okay,
paragraph number?
It's, it's on page 45. It's paragraph 7.1.4, so at the very bottom of the page. And it's just it's a second line of that paragraph.
Yes, thank you, sir. So in terms of some of the locations, we have identified suitable mitigation, but we consider that in terms of kind of monitoring the implications of local plan growth and kind of our management of the network in certain locations, those mitigations may not be our preferred approach. And for example, at the City Road, Wolfric Road junction, which is a route that the Supertram runs on, an extremely important mass transit corridor in the city, that our current practice of effective network management strategies, which is to manage side road movements to maintain a priority on the main corridor, may be an approach that we would want to continue with, and we'll be reviewing that before we got to the place where we would kind of agree to move forward with the mitigation of signalising the entire junction. And that's something that we would want to keep under review in terms of that manage and monitor approach. And similar principles would be taken against some of the other junctions that have been identified, the 5 junctions that have been identified. Sorry, sir, would you like me to go into your question at the start covered all of the network, I think. Do you want me to move on to kind of strategic road networking?
Yeah, my supplementary question was going to just ask about the strategic road network. Obviously, the question really, certain parts of those have been identified within the plan. It's a similar issue, really. Obviously, some are considered to be over capacity with additional traffic generated by the plan, by the scenarios of 2029 and 2039. Again, how does the council intend to address that, and are the mitigation measures proposed justified, and how will they be delivered? Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the strategic road network, The impacts are covered in exam 26. The report on strategic road impacts and potential mitigation, and they're summarised at page 46 of that document. As previously outlined, the principles around our appraisal taking a worst case scenario assessment, so a policy off approach, was also undertaken through this assessment. The flows that we've used for the strategic road network assessment have been taken from the National Highways model. So through our collaborative discussions with colleagues at National Highways, we agreed to use those flows to ensure a more robust assessment, and they are higher than the ones that are included within the strategic model. The need for mitigation was determined by considering the increase in the degree of saturation at these junctions, the signalised junctions, and the ratio of flow to capacity for priority and roundabout junctions on the network. As I mentioned, detailed collaborative working was undertaken with colleagues at National Highways to determine the impacts, criteria and appropriate level of mitigation. And at 5 locations, again, potential mitigations have been identified on the strategic road network. They're at M1 junctions 31 and 35, and on the A616 at Thornfield Road roundabout, the A616 A61 Westwood roundabout, and the A616 A629 priority interchange. Again, within document exam 26, summary descriptions of those mitigations and what would be proposed is at table 12 on page 38, and they're also covered in plans appendix D of the report. Just to highlight that junction 34 is considered separately through the microsimulation modelling exercise that was undertaken and covered in other documents. So based on the work that we've done to date, there are no highway capacity issues on the strategic road network caused by the trips generated through the local plan, which cannot be successfully mitigated. Through the statement of common ground with National Highways, exam 36, we have agreed to work with National Highways as planning applications are received and approved to monitor the impacts of local plan developments, so that we can ensure that where required, the appropriate mitigations are delivered at appropriate timescales alongside development. The emphasis for mitigation is on reducing car dependency and promoting active travel and public transport for new developments, as I mentioned earlier. So that reflects the approach set out in DfT's Circular 1/2022 Strategic Road Network and the Delivery of Sustainable Development. That requires highway mitigations to be considered only once alternative options to manage down the traffic impacts of planned development have been considered as a first preference. Intervention to support walking, wheeling and cycle movements and to facilitate high quality public transport and access to it will be considered as a starting point for developers to mitigate the impacts of their development.
Thanks, Mr. Finnegan-Smith. Mr. Waring, I think you wanted just to ask a question, so if you want to come in at the stage and ask that question.
Thank you, sir. It's not a question as such. It's probably just an observation and picking up on the matters that we've dealt with in the Statement of Common Ground. So, British Land.
Sorry, is this your Statement of Common Ground? I am going to come on to it. I don't know if you've seen the agenda.
I have seen the agenda.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's appropriate because it's about mitigation, how it's going to be delivered. But
is it possible just to leave it, just if it's to do specifically with what's falling out of the Statement of Common Ground? I think if I could just, literally it's only another item or two down the agenda. Say, if that's okay, Mr. Waring, I'll cover other issues first.
I was getting excited. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's okay. Yeah, as we all do. Okay, thanks. Okay, so yeah, if I just sort of the next question really obviously is about the Statement of Common Ground, but with the national highways. Obviously, it sets out basically, I think in table 2 of the Statement of Common Ground, mitigation measures in relation to 6 strategic road network junctions. I suppose it's whether the council, obviously in National Highways, can also clarify what is meant by the indicative merge, divert sort of mitigation measures that have been developed in the 6 other locations on the strategic road network as outlined in table 2 of the Statement of Common Ground. Are the essential schemes required to support the delivery of the growth in the plan? Thank you. I'll come to the council first, Mr. Finnegan-Smith. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So I guess the best way of kind of covering what the merge diverge proposals are is to kind of refer to plans that show them really. I can describe them, but it's a technical description. Effectively, the plans Appendix D of exam 26, and those are figures D7 to D11 in that appendix, show the proposed diverge or merge or both amendments that are proposed as potential mitigation. The assessment of the merge diverges highlighted that there was minimal severe impacts found at SRM merge diverge movements as a result of the local plan development impacts. Those are explained in section 4.2 of exam 26. That's the local plan transport assessment, specifically the report on the strategic road network impacts and potential mitigation produced in March 2024. And there are 5 locations where merged diverges are shown to potentially require physical alteration to bring them up to standard. All of those clearly on the M1 around junction 31, junction 33, 34, 35 and 36. So again, in terms of the principle we've agreed with National Highways is that we're proposing to review the operation of the junctions 5 years into the local plan to see kind of whether the requirements to implement improvements are met. All of the other merge diverge facilities at junctions, both northbound and southbound, are considered to operate within their current standards and therefore not require a change in standard to accommodate development traffic associated with the plan. Through the Statement of Common Ground, we've agreed to work with National Highways, as I mentioned, and we'll be reviewing the requirements for mitigation as planning applications are received and approved to monitor whether the impact of local plan developments requires appropriate mitigations to be delivered, and the timescales associated with that alongside development will be determined. If possible, I can bring in the kind of consultants if you want to go into any more detail on any of the merge to diverge details. And in terms of the kind of, I think we've circulated at lunchtime today a plan of M1 junction 34 north as well. I can cover some of that in more detail if required.
I think we'll obviously come, if we need to, we can come on to that when we talk about the specifics, particularly in relation to the Statement of Common Ground with British Land and the National Highways. I don't know whether National Highways want to raise anything particularly on this particular point in terms of the merge diverge discussions, the details that have been set out at this stage, or I think probably the council probably have covered it, but if you want to add anything further.
Thank you, sir. I think that the council has certainly highlighted the core agreements between ourselves, and obviously we rely heavily on exam documents 36 and 43 also, in terms of our evidence and the joint position of the 6 junctions that we've identified as requiring mitigation as a result of the impact of the local plan. The deliverability of those we're agreed on. Unless you want to get into the technical side, obviously the council has just offered to introduce their colleagues from Sistra, who have worked with my colleagues here from Jacobs extensively for a good couple of years now on all of this. If you want to get into that, we certainly can do, and we'll be more than happy to provide a more technical overview to you if you wish. But equally, Sistra, who are on the other side of the table there, can also provide that.
I think basically reference to the actual the appendix, and obviously I'll be able to deliberate on the information that's been provided. So, but thank you for that offer. I think I should have adequate information at this stage on that particular matter. But thank you.
Sir, if I might, just to clarify, Annex A is the section within exam document 43, which is the IDP, and it's to that which I refer. It outlines the scheme descriptions and the funding mechanisms and the phasing that we've worked on. Just for clarification for you, that's all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Yeah, I just wanted to go on to the next item on the agenda. Yeah, just about the cumulative impacts again of the combination of the proposed local road network and strategic road network mitigation improvements. Have they been tested through the modelling, transport modelling? What have been those outcomes? Should the mitigation be required, do the proposed schemes successfully mitigate the impact of the growth associated with the local plan?
Thank you, sir. Yes, there has been a cumulative impact assessment of mitigation. Our consultant Sistra undertook a strategic model run which focused on the cumulative impacts of all 10 mitigation proposals, together with reduced levels of demand in the city centre. And that's covered at section 9 of exam 3I, the report on the strategic modelling results on page 65. Analysis of the impacts has showed there are no spurious results due to reassignment, and the proposed mitigation measures do not result in any further junctions being pushed over capacity. In addition, the mitigation measures do not result in adverse outcomes, such as induced demand, displacement of traffic, or traffic congestion in adjacent local authorities. So our tests have shown that should they be required, the proposed schemes would successfully mitigate the impacts of the cumulative growth from the local plan, noting that clearly, as mentioned earlier, our kind of approach is a public transport and active travel first principle.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Finnegan-Smith. Just going on to the next question then about the further work. Obviously, that's been done more detailed microsimulation transport modelling. I wonder if you just sort of give me more detail about obviously the reasons behind those particular pieces of work, and could just go through basically the proposed impacts and mitigation that's been proposed by the M1 junction 34 to north-south, Lower Don Valley, and then finally the city centre microsimulation work, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, sir. So I'll take each one of those in turn. In terms of the microsimulation modelling, which is a finer grained detail than the strategic transport model, and it's something the city has used for some time now. M1 junction 34 north and south, that's covered in exam 27, the Sheffield area aims some modelling junction 34 future year impacts and mitigations. So that covers those impacts and mitigations that have been identified working closely with National Highways. Potential mitigation schemes were developed and tested against two different growth scenarios. The first one being the growth which is predicted within the Sheffield City Region Transport Model used within the Strategic Transport Modelling exercises, and also a second scenario which covered a higher growth scenario that was agreed with National Highways, using a range of data that they were able to share with us through those discussions.
Can I just ask what I read about the two scenarios, just the high growth scenario, what sort of were the assumptions in that? Just where I could, obviously just a reference to where those particular points are and what the high growth scenario entail, please.
So the higher growth scenario was effectively a review of kind of some of the data within the strategic transport model, working with National Highways. They'd reviewed some of the data in terms of traffic flows and volumes, and from information that they had and were able to share with us, they had recommended that a higher traffic volumes or turning movements to replicate kind of junction performance should be used. So we agreed to run two scenarios there. The higher growth scenarios, the higher trip scenarios were from National Highways information, and the first scenario was from information contained within our strategic transport model.
Is there a specific reference where I can source where that information is, where the underlying assumptions were? I assume, that it's just really where that basically I can refer to those differences between those scenarios, because reading the reports it's not clear, but yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir. So they're covered within the Exam 27 report at paragraph 3.1 on page 15. So in terms of the potential mitigation schemes, those were developed and tested against those scenarios, and arising from that test, a range of potential mitigation measures for junction 34 have been identified. Mitigation A and B, as explained in section 3.1 of exam document 27, providing a flexible approach that will allow appropriate levels of mitigation to be provided depending on the scale of the impact that is experienced in practice. So again, we've set those out in terms of, and they're included in our statement of common ground in table 6 of the IDP, exam document 46. The impacts of the local plan developments on the SRN, as I mentioned earlier, will be monitored as applications are received to ensure that we can, where required, ensure that the appropriate mitigations are delivered at appropriate timescales. Shall I move on to the others? So the Lower Don Valley is covered in exam document 28. That's the Sheffield area AIMSOM model Lower Don Valley report, which covers the local highway impacts. The assessment of the Lower Don Valley has included two mitigation schemes which have been identified and tested. SRM mitigation is identified at N1 junction 34. That's covered in report exam 27, and an improvement on the local road network at the A6178 Sheffield Road, Vulcan Road roundabout, which includes an additional lane at Vulcan Road roundabout heading north on Sheffield Road. That allows for the full utilisation of the new lane at Tinsley roundabout. So those schemes are, to a certain extent, linked as a mitigation test. Those are explained in section 2.3 of the report, exam 28 report. Modelling indicates that two schemes in combination would address the main impacts associated with the local plan in this area. On page 25 of exam 28, it's acknowledged that some residual impacts remain, including at the A57 Mosborough Parkway, A630 Sheffield Parkway Dumbbell roundabouts. However, we consider that the current arrangement there meters traffic entering the wider network, in particular the parkway, and acts to deter further trips by private car, metering and managing that access. As such, highway mitigation at that location is not something that we consider to be desirable. For the city centre, that's covered in exam document 31, the Sheffield Local Plan City Centre Aimson modelling report, or in future year modelling report. Modelling undertaken for the city centre has shown that as the city centre does become more congested, and some specific locations on the network will require further monitoring and management in future years. That's covered in sections 4.3 and 4.4 of the report. And those include a number of sections of our inner ring road. In Sheffield, we don't have an outer orbital ring road, unlike some major cities. So in terms of some of the locations of interest are Broad Lane, eastbound, Rockingham Street, Netherthorpe Road and west of the city, Neeps End Lane, Penistone Road, Rutland Road, the Southern Ring Road towards Rockingham Street, Northern Ring Road and Bridge Street and around the Corporation Street area. There are already a large number of localised highway schemes that are either planned or committed between when the report was written in 2023 through to 2029. Most of those changes, similar to other UK city centres, are mainly schemes which provide more space to people, including more public realm, pedestrianisation, infrastructure to encourage active travel, so walking and cycling and wheeling, and the use of public transport, and less car space for cars, as we provide that space for those other uses. We have a number of schemes at the moment that are live in Sheffield. They're through our Connecting Sheffield programme. Some of them are on site at the moment. In particular, there's a scheme between the city centre and Kelham Island and Neeps End, which is an active travel corridor, which effectively redistributes space for cycling and better walking facilities. So many of those changes will reduce road capacity in the city centre, and they, as a result, we're hoping will encourage a mode shift away from private car to more sustainable modes of transport, including active travel and public transport. So that will lessen some of the adverse impacts of traffic that are described in the report. Those are invariably and can sometimes be harder to model in a traditional transport modelling approach. But it's important to note that the model indicates that whilst congestion and delays to general traffic are likely to increase in future years as a result of the local plan, impacts on public transport are potentially much more modest, which is important and extremely important to support that shift to more sustainable modes. The reason for that is mainly due to the existing and proposed policies and infrastructure within the city to protect bus routes and, where possible, provide bus lanes and bus gates to provide priority over other traffic. The Council's approach to the city centre is set out clearly in our recently adopted Sheffield Transport Vision, where we state that the city centre will be a place where you don't need a car to get around. The priorities within that vision are clear, that building new highway schemes to provide for private vehicles is not the solution, and that instead we will adopt a monitor and manage approach. So over the next 12 months, there is a piece of work aligned to our vision that we will be developing. That's a city centre access and movement strategy. So it will use the evidence base that we've produced in terms of the transport assessments associated with the local plan, but it will move us to that delivery planning stage in terms of a city centre vision through to delivery using the local plan transport assessment as an evidence base. I think one of the things that is probably worthwhile highlighting is that the modelling does produce higher levels of demand than we feel are actually likely to be realised, especially when you consider the policies in the local plan which promote sustainable development that is car-free or very low car, and within the central area in particular. So in terms of reflecting the lower car parking provision expected in the city centre, peak hour trips to and from each of the 5 largest trip generators were capped at their respective car park capacity and not above that level. But we still feel that that is a worst case scenario, and that refers back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of the cumulative impact assessment of mitigation and the kind of the city centre approach that we took through that assessment.
So yeah, I think you've touched on the residual impacts, which I think I was going to come on to, but that's very helpful, basically, in terms of obviously that shift, particularly in the city centre, to a more car-free, low car sort of usage, basically with the particular proposals that are in the Sheffield Plan. You don't, obviously cumulatively, obviously there are going to be knock-on effects you're indicating, but on balance you don't think there are going to be unacceptable impacts in terms of the highways network in that central area?
Yes, sir, that's right. And the approach is in line with our kind of stated policy position now for some time within our Sheffield transport strategy, our Sheffield decarbonisation route map around the way we travel in the city, which was adopted last year, and that is consistent with our transport vision adopted in March this year. And again, kind of national policy, kind of the need to decarbonise our network and move to a more sustainable approach is where we'll be moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Finnegan-Smith. Okay, we're going to just go to the issue of M1 Junction 24, obviously the latest work, just in terms of the statement of common ground that's just been received yesterday. I think maybe just the Council, just to go through it, and then obviously if Mr Waring and anybody else wants to contribute to the particular issue, how the background to this and the contributing factors. I think I raised in my questions, I think stemming from the representations about the actual applications that are sort of either ongoing or basically sort of have been granted, particularly the mixed use, major mixed use development at Meadowhall, I've referenced to in the agenda. So just really, if you just give us an overview first, thank you.
Yes, thank you. So yes, in terms of our assessments, so the modelling we've undertaken does not include the Meadowhall master plan development, as it isn't an allocated site and was not a committed development when the strategic model was finalised in October 2023. The outline consent for the development includes conditions which require an assessment of traffic impact prior to any part of the development coming forward. So as part of that, we propose that the condition transport assessment will need to demonstrate that as a minimum, any impact on the SRN can at least be accommodated by the local plan M1 Junction 34 scenario 2 mitigation. And as you mentioned, sir, that is reflected in the statement of common ground, which is exam document 57.
Ms Waring, do you want to come in now, just in terms of your contribution, obviously, to the statement of common ground, and obviously in terms of your representation, in terms of the particular works, highway transport works that are ongoing or sort of may stem from effectively the potential development that's been permitted. So.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, so it might be worth just giving a bit of context for your benefit to the developments that have been permitted in the Meadowhall area. So British Land, so I think you may now be aware, have sold or in the process of selling 50%, their ownership of Meadowhall to Norge. But as a consequence, British Land still remain as development managers for the scheme. I have been involved, as has Greg Callaghan, in relation to some fairly sizable schemes in Meadowhall. One referred to as the Leisure Hall, or TLH, which was granted planning permission back in 2018, which was a major expansion of Meadowhall itself, which was a significant leisure expansion and some additional retail. That consent has subsequently expired, and more recently, and that was a full planning consent. And at that time, a significant amount of transport work was undertaken to determine the impacts of that development on the highway network. And with some mitigation, it was deemed appropriate and acceptable to both Council and to National Highways. If you need any more details, Mr. Callaghan can give you that. Post that approval, British Land progressed a separate planning application that was to replace what's called TLH and replaced it with what's called the Meadowhall Master Plan, which is also known as TMM. And that's the one that has recently been consented at the end of last year. Associated with that, and that's, it was a hybrid planning consent that extended over Meadowhall Shopping Centre and some land around Meadowhall. At the time that was being progressed as a planning application, there was a considerable, the COVID-19 had impacted on the ability to undertake proper transport assessments. So we ended up agreeing with the Council and National Highways a condition that set essentially a range of potential mitigations that would be delivered as part of that scheme. It's worth noting, though, sir, that that scheme is a hybrid and was anticipated and is anticipated to come forward in phases, some of which, the most major piece of the development, which is the major expansion of Meadowhall, is conditioned and controlled through the planning permission to not come forward before November 2029. And that is the lion's share of that scheme. So there's some smaller elements that can come forward, which involve a change of use of what's known as the source, development of land known as Plot 5, which is up to about 8,000 square metres of development, and an extension to the cinema. And those are all relatively small fry in terms of the scheme as a whole. The way the planning consent is set up, there's a condition that requires some modelling to be undertaken, and that modelling is pretty well advanced now, that determines ultimately the trigger points at which mitigation will come forward if it is to come forward. I think the point that we've made in our representations are that there is at present no certainty of delivery of all of that mitigation. One, it may not be necessary as part of the TMM consent, and if it is necessary, then it may be some way down the line before it is actually delivered. So as a consequence, we were concerned when we first saw the evidence. There was a suggestion that that mitigation that we've been talking about in terms of Junction 34 North, Persian Diverge, was going to be delivered by TMM, and clearly it isn't. As a consequence, further discussions with the council clarified through evidence and also now more recently in the Statement of Common Ground that the anticipation is that that mitigation, if necessary, will be delivered through a range of mechanisms. That may be TMM in the future, or it may be a different planning permission on the site, and it will be also through developer contributions from other forms of development, as well as SIL contributions, as well as capital programmes. The commitment from the council, as expressed in the Statement of Common Ground, to an SPD, which you'll note isn't yet in the local plan and isn't in the council's local development scheme, is something that we support and we think is necessary and essential. The purpose of that SPD is to determine a mechanism to determine ultimately the level of contributions potentially from other schemes that may have an impact on that junction. What we're very keen to ensure, though, is that that SPD is carried out expediently, because otherwise, as developments come forward or planning applications come forward with no SPD in place, it may be that some schemes don't, or the council don't manage to secure any contributions from those schemes. Or alternatively, we end up in a situation where we have holding objections from National Highways until matters are resolved, and those can take some time, as we've experienced ourselves, and that's no criticism of National Highways, but they go through their diligent approach. So that all the while that potentially holds up development coming forward. So that is an important part of the plan, we think. It is also of note that the suggestion at the moment that mitigation will be required at Junction 34 North by 2029, we're only 5 years off 2029, and depending on how long it takes for this local plan to be adopted, and then if we have to wait for an SPD, we might find ourselves close to 2029. So I think it is a matter that we would like to see an SPD come forward quickly. And I think, so on that basis, the plan at the moment is silent on it, and I think it needs referencing in there. And I think it also needs referencing which schemes are anticipated to perhaps contribute to various mitigations that will be covered in that SPD, because at the moment we're all a little blind on that. I mean, if we just come back to that SPD, we consider that is a fair and proportionate way of dealing with the mitigation. We think it'll give the greatest prospect of those schemes required in those mitigation schemes to be brought forward. It'll also provide the greatest amount of clarity to the development industry. And by bringing that forward, it'll also ensure that the contributions can be secured in the short term. I think the final point was, and there was a reference to the Junction 34 North Merge Diverge plan, which had been circulated this lunchtime or was in existence this lunchtime. I think we understand what it might look like, but we would like to see it if that's at all possible.
Thank you, Mr. Waring. That's very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, just get the council to respond if it could. Yeah, basically, obviously, just pick up on Mr. Waring's comments, particularly about the SPD, and maybe just if you just refer to where that particular map is. I understand it. It should have been part of exam document 26. just so obviously, if that's where it's due to sit, or it's due to sit, basically we just need to clarify that particular. It was basically a design, wasn't it? I think you said was omitted. But thank you.
Perhaps, sir, if I can just deal with the question about the reference to SPD. I think we agree it would be helpful for the plan to include a reference to SPD. I think we're just trying to decide where would be the best place to put that. Yeah, I mean, I think possibly within the developer contributions policy, with DC1 in part 2 of the plan, or possibly linked to one of the transport policies. Could we come back to you with a suggestion on that, if that's all right? But I think we agree in principle that a reference to SPD would be appropriate.
Probably similar to my other sort of issues, that if it's an SPD, it needs to be in the supporting text rather than the actual policy itself, if it is wherever it sits, because effectively it is in the document that's been examined, so it can't have policy status effectively in terms of it being examined. But yeah, I think, yes, if you come back to me, add that as an action, and we can see what your feedback is on that. Thank you. So, is it Miss Finnegan-Smith? You're just going to clarify this map, if so. Obviously, Mr. Waring's aware of where it might be. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we do have a copy of the kind of full mitigation for junction 34, which doesn't just include the merge diverge. The sections of the report I referred to earlier don't include that junction, I understand. I might need to pass on to colleagues at Sistra to just confirm in terms of the kind of position on that. But the plans that were circulated earlier, as I mentioned earlier, that have been circulated at lunchtime, should include that, I believe.
Yeah, just for clarification, the drawings were actually included within the report, but as separate drawings. So what we've done is merge the drawings, so it actually includes the merge diverge and the actual junction itself.
Sorry, which document?
I think we're just trying to clarify. I need clarifications what Mr. Waring. So yeah, once we know where it sits, you'll be able to view where it is, if it is available at this stage, publicly available. If it's not, we can obviously ensure that obviously it is made available. Obviously I think that can be, sort of an action I can give to the council if obviously it's not. It's obviously come in late. It was an omission, I understand, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just to clarify, it's in document 26.
Okay, so where is it in exam doc? Is it due to be an appendix, effectively, because I've obviously got exam document 26, I assume, from the note I received from the council. Is it due to be added as an appendix? So that's just so clarifying whereabouts.
A document 26 as an appendix, yeah.
Sorry, sir. I think the question specifically is around junction 34. And I think that the combined plans that we've just referred to are not in that document, but they have now been submitted, is my understanding of the case, for junction 34.
Yeah, I mean, if we can just clarify that, yeah, the plans have been submitted, and it's just we add them as an exam document, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, so they're not obviously on the exam, but they're not uploaded yet. But if we could just add that as an action to basically make sure they are uploaded to the examination library. So obviously Mr. Waring and British Land can obviously, and anybody else can obviously refer to them if needs be. Those combined sort of documents or combined schemes, that would be useful, so everyone's clear what they're showing. Thank you. I haven't really got. I've got an understanding now of Mr. Waring of the position on, and obviously the statement common ground is a useful step. So with those two actions, is there anything else anybody wants to raise, on in relation to this matter?
I think so. What we'd be very keen to understand is there a programme for the production of the SPD? And appreciate it might be referenced in the local plan, but let's assume that it might not be adopted, the local plan, until next year. It won't be adopted this year. What is the programme looking like for an SPD to give the development industry some certainty and to ensure that the council can deliver their mitigation within the local plan period, and especially the trigger points of 2029 and 2039.
I wonder if the council have given any thought to this at this stage. Obviously, the SPD will run obviously separate to obviously the actual local plan as a document. But have the council given any thought in terms of time frames for this particular SPD? So it'd be just useful just to have an update. Thank you.
Yes, I think in response to some other matters around the habitat mitigation, I think we in terms of the special area of conservation in the Peak Park, we did talk in one of the earlier sessions about developer contributions and the need to get an SPD in place as soon after adoption as the plan as possible. I think we need to go away and give it a little more thought in terms of actually what the timescales would be, but certainly a commitment to do it as soon as possible after adoption of the plan. It would be a priority.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vincent. Okay, I'm just going to. I think that probably covers all my questions on the transport side, transport section of my agenda. I was going to move on to unless there's anything anybody wants to raise, I was going to move on to the issues relating to sustainable transport and the transport network and accessibility. That's my item number 4. So just in terms of the what is the justification for the new transport infrastructure listed under policies SP1J, SP1K and Policy T1, is it clear to decision makers, developers and the local community who will deliver the necessary transport infrastructure and when? And are they deliverable within the plan period? Is there funding in place? And my final question on that is, are they clearly defined on the policies map?
Thank you, sir. So in terms of the infrastructure within those policies, we believe they collectively support the development of a robust transport network, which will enhance connectivity and promote active travel and public transport. as mentioned briefly earlier, they reflect the priorities in our transport strategy in Sheffield, the South Yorkshire Transport Strategy, which was adopted in 2019, and the new Sheffield Transport Vision, which is exam document 33. Collectively, those documents recognise the importance of improving connectivity to support sustainable growth and demonstrate the Council's commitment to bringing forward the infrastructure and services needed to enable a shift towards more sustainable ways of travelling. The sustainable growth of the city is essential, and at different levels, some of those infrastructure proposals focus within Sheffield, but also that reach out across South Yorkshire and intercity, as is the case for some of the intercity rail proposals. Essential to kind of supporting our productivity as a city and expanding workforce opportunities and agglomeration. I'm happy to go in turn in terms of some of those infrastructure requirements in detail, if that would be useful. So in terms of rail, our priorities align with MPPF focus on promoting sustainable transport. In terms of the government's new Network North programme, that's clearly replaced the previous proposals around High Speed 2. And it also, Network North does cover some of those intercity connectivity proposals, but also local restoring your railway projects as well. Bringing forward major improvements to enhance the rail connectivity, capacity and journey times between Sheffield and other major cities such as Leeds, it is fundamental to supporting the wider connectivity to support the growth proposed in the plan. In terms of bus, the infrastructure incorporates a number of mass transit corridors, so high frequency, high quality public transport corridors that have been identified within the Sheffield Transport Strategy. The policy plan related to mass transit corridors is there to provide an indication of where those corridors would run. They're usually to major conurbations or transport interchanges or hubs where that frequency of service is strong and then doesn't diverge. In terms of the schemes to deliver that, we've already started delivering some of our scheme proposals through our Transforming Cities Fund and further funding that's been secured through the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, which has been awarded to South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. In terms of the development of all those mass transit corridors and bus improvement projects, they will effectively be developed into the detail required as those schemes develop. Hence why I've described the policy map covering those as indicative. In terms of active travel infrastructure, which from the kind of city centre first approach within the plan, we feel that's vital to support the provision of both local connectivity, providing enhancements to support a reduced reliance on cars for shorter trips, but also for some of those key connections into the city centre and out of the city centre. Again, that aligns with national policy priorities to provide for attractive and well-designed walking and cycling networks, and not forgetting wheeling as well. The priorities that have been established within the transport strategy, Sheffield's transport strategy in 2019, have been reflected in our Sheffield Transport Vision and also within our programmed, committed programme activity. In terms of tram, Sheffield's blessed to have a tram network. The Super Tram is an essential part of our overall public transport system in Sheffield and now extended out to Rotherham. It has a significant role in enabling zero emission kind of mass transit within the city and enabling growth in the local plan. Funding to secure the long-term future of the tram network has been confirmed with the Department for Transport in terms of the first £100 million to renew the tram. Further renewal funding has just been approved at outline business case with the Department for Transport. That activity has been led by South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, as is the delivery of the renewal work, but supported very much by Sheffield City Council. In terms of highways and kind of vehicular trips are obviously still going to be kind of important, but they're important in terms of providing those strategic connectivity. Multimodal highway improvements on the strategic and main highway network will be vital to enhancing wider connectivity and supporting growth. Noting, as I've mentioned before, that our policy first approach in terms of active travel and public transport is there to try and minimise the impacts in terms of road traffic. Happy to cover anything else in more detail on that. The delivery of the infrastructure is obviously, and the costs and potential funding around that is covered within the infrastructure delivery plan, but happy to touch on any specifics should that be required.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Finnegan-Smith. Obviously, since the public consultation on the draft plan, there's obviously been progress made in relation to the Restoring Your Railways project. I just wanted to give me an update on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So yes, the Restoring Your Railways projects within Sheffield, there are two of them. There is the proposed Sheffield to Chesterfield connection along the Barrow Hill line, and also the Sheffield to Stocksbridge connectivity along the Don Valley line. Those are described in the IDP, part 2, exam document 43 in paragraphs 3.1.47 to 3.1.49. In terms of both schemes, the current position is that they are named schemes within the Network North announcements from government. The Barrow Hill line project is currently working towards the submission of an outline business case, and that is expected to be submitted in September, autumn of this year, with decisions on that in early 2025. The current potential service opening dates are late 2028 or early 2029. Clearly there's kind of more work to be done on those schemes as they progress to outline business case, but the Department for Transport, Network Rail, local authorities and transport authorities are working collaboratively to move those schemes forward. The Don Valley line is a little further behind. It was announced slightly later than Barrow Hill line. It's around 6 to 12 months behind that, although we are looking at options of how the project can be accelerated. They clearly have various stages that they've gone through and will need to go through. We feel that there is significant opportunity around supporting plan growth with those schemes, and we feel it's important that the key principles of those connections are included and embedded in the plan, even though there's still some way to go. So in terms of that, we proposed a modification to policies to reflect that, policies SB1J, T1, to ensure that the plan provides sufficient support for those and any other upgrades.
Okay, if I bring Mr. Key in now, I think this might be your
It's my
area. Thank you.
moment today, sir. Thank you. So, just to recap for everyone's benefit, I mean, we've talked in previous sessions of the examination about the interests that we represent here and the type of development that we're trying to progress, being employment-led, mixed-use development, and that really how that proceeds really go to your findings, sir, on employment and housing needs. But irrespective of all of that, the third element in the scheme is the proposed new station at Waverley, which is in the plan, in policy T1 in particular. And we support that. Norfolk Estate's position is that we will make land available for that. We've met with colleagues at the council and had those high-level discussions. So really, it's a simple point in terms of today's session. It's really that the station is identified in the various infrastructure plan documents, and we've talked about those and we've referenced them all. It appears in the local plan itself on a map on page 100. There's a zoomed out map that shows the Barrow Hill line, and it identifies the proposed new station at Waverley, although it does say within Rotherham, and of course that's partly right, but it's also not partly right because half of it will be in Sheffield, so I'd make that point. But the overriding point is really, I think it ought to show on the proposals map as well, because it's a committed scheme. It's part of the local plan strategy, and it ought to show on the policies map as well. I suspect part of the issue, sir, is that obviously the proposals map being ordnance survey based, there's a precisely how the station would sit and how it would be laid out is probably unknown at the moment. I mean, I suspect there's a strong idea, but it won't be any more than that, and I suspect that's part of the issue. But as I'm sure you've experienced elsewhere, I mean, I know I have in these sorts of situations, the way forward is often some sort of annotation on the proposals map in the broad location of where this would go, rather than a precise ordnance survey kind of line, if you like. So that was the point I just wanted to make. It does also spill over into tomorrow in terms of greenbelt boundaries, and so I need to take you through a part of the MPPF on that, but I'll deal with that tomorrow. But that's the point, really, sir. Thank you.
Could I just get the council's response, obviously, to Mr. Key's issues that he's raised, obviously in relation to the Waverley station. Obviously, it's particularly in relation to the maps, policy maps, etc.
So I think just 2 points. Firstly, the point in terms of the map, which we'll deal with. But secondly, I note the point about dealing with certain matters tomorrow in the Greenbelt session. We've obviously got transport colleagues here today, and one of the issues I think is going to be the extent to which the proposed station is local transport infrastructure or regional transport infrastructure for the purposes of Greenbelt policy. And whilst we can deal with that tomorrow, I think it would be helpful to have the view of those sat to the right of me now, because now is when they're here. So if we deal with the map point first.
Yes, I think we'd agree with Mr. Keys that it's helpful to add a notation onto the policies map, and I think we have no problem with that. I think we'd also suggest that it's added to the sub-area map 10 as well, so as a symbol. We're happy with that.
Yeah, thank you.
And just sir, for your note, the map 10 is on page 75, and the scale is a little bit easier to read, I think, than the map at page 100.
Hey, Mr. Finnegan-Smith, you're going to give us your knowledge or your input really on terms of this issue, whether it's local or regional infrastructure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So we would class the proposed station at Waverley as a local station along the line. Clearly it potentially will be served by the Barrow Hill line services, but at the moment there are Lincoln line services there. We wouldn't describe the station as a regional station or regional hub in that sense. It's different to kind of major stations within South Yorkshire, like Midland Station or Barnsley Station Interchange. It would be classed as a local station. Nevertheless, a very important opportunity in terms of providing rail access to that part of South Yorkshire and the opportunities that exist.
Yeah, so just to make a suggestion on that, and that's that we explain that in the supporting text to the relevant policy that it is local infrastructure rather than regional. We can make that clear in the supporting text to the relevant policy.
Just on that, Mr. Obviously, I'll get Mr. Keys to come back. But if you were going to add a reference, again, you presume you just need time just to see where that might slot in as a main modification, if that's going to be the case. Is that right? Where that reference to local, or you think it'd just be in the key to the actual? Yeah.
Is that on? Yeah. One option, because we've just indicated that the council's just indicated it's going to be looking at indicatively labelling the station on the key, would be to make that clear in that labelling.
Again, I mean the maps really are again within the councils. It's an additional modification. It won't be something we'd need to. The actual mapping itself is something in the council's sort of jurisdiction in a sense. So it'd be something need to be picked up as an additional modification as opposed to a main modification. Yeah.
Yes, I suppose just thinking about it, given that the proposals map is supposed to be show the geographic application of the policies in the plan, it might make sense, just thinking off the top of my head, to have it in both the supporting text and on the plan. But we'll give some thought to that, sir.
Sorry, Mr. Key, if you want to just come back. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you to colleagues across the room for that, agreeing to the first bit of what I was saying. Just going back to the framework and paragraph 150, which is of course what we're talking about, and criterion C in that, talking about local infrastructure. Our position has been that this is regional infrastructure because the services that will run from the proposed Waverley station and the reopened Barrow Hill line will be regional services. The destinations will be Chesterfield and wider destinations in Derbyshire. So that's why I'm saying it's regional infrastructure, because it's providing a regional service. If this was I don't know, I mean, this is entirely hypothetical, but if this was a tram line where you could jump on and you went to the centre of Sheffield only, of course, that would be looking at local, but it's wider than that. So that's why we're saying it's regional infrastructure. But the bigger point, sir, is, I mean, we all want this to happen, but the bigger point here is this is where we all collectively need to make life easy for ourselves, because we all want this to happen. And at some point, somebody's going to have to put a planning application in for this station, and we just want that to be, it was what we all want to see delivered, and we want it to be as easy as possible. And if it's out of the green belt, even in the circus, I'm talking a scenario here, sir. So you know what our position of this examination is in terms of your findings on employment and housing needs, but we're talking now in a scenario where you're saying, yes, the plan as drafted is sound and it can go forward. This is a modification that kind of needs to happen anyway, because as I say, somebody is going to be putting in a planning application. It might be us, it might be the council, it might be Network Rail, it could be a number of parties, but and that application will have a substantially easier ride if it's identified as being out of the green belt. And that really is what it comes down to. Thank you.
It'd be useful just to get your input because it is. I know it's a green belt issue, but to be honest, it's quite specific. So I'd quite be useful if we pick up the point really now with the benefits, so it gives us that information. So.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess just to kind of provide a view, my view in terms of the local, regional nature of the station, and you know, we've had some discussions with South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority as the transport authority for South Yorkshire. And the reason we're referring to this as a local station and not a regional station is in terms of the reach of the area in which this station will serve, in terms of the local nature of it serving Waverley New Community and some of those important employment sites at the Advanced Manufacturing Park. Whereas a regional station would have a far wider reach in terms of its kind of radius of influence, if that makes sense.
Thank you for that explanation. Again, it's really, I probably do need the council's just view really on their sort of whether this is something they'd consider to be something they'd consider to where an amendment to the green belt would be required, or is it just in terms of obviously the policies map. But it's just a view, really.
Yeah, I think so. We're talking about a very, very small area of land on the Sheffield side of the railway. I think Mr. Finnegan-Smith might want to just explain where the sort of proposals for the actual station infrastructure is going to be located. And my understanding is the majority of it is going to be on the Rotherham side, which is not in the green belt. So we'd be left with quite an odd little hole in the green belt on the edge of Sheffield. I think so. If you look at the policies map, I think you get an impression of how odd that might be. But I don't know. Mr. Finnegan-Smith might want to just comment on the sort of proposals for the actual layout of the station and where any buildings might be and whether it's appropriate, or what impact it might have on the green belt side, on Sheffield's side of the boundary.
Thank you. So just to confirm as well to start with, so Rotherham Metropolitan Borough Council are the sponsor for this scheme. The site of the proposed Waverley station is predominantly within Rotherham. So there is land required in Rotherham adjacent to railway land, and that's where all of the major station infrastructure will be. And ancillary kind of facilities. The access road to the station is entirely within Rotherham, connecting to Rotherham's highway network. There will be a requirement for a small amount of land on the Sheffield side. So the borough boundary, the city boundary, is to the kind of the south west of the railway line at that location. And that is a small amount of land connecting from the proposed platforms at the station through to the overbridge proposed to facilitate movement across the railway line.
Sorry, can I come back? So just first of all, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a point, as I think Mr. Finnegan-Smith has explained there, that it's essentially on the Sheffield side. It's going to be an access to the station, which is still predominantly open in character, I think, and so it still performs the purposes of Greenbelt as set out in the framework. So I think it still leaves a question about how you would draw the boundary at this stage, in terms of having a clearly defensible boundary. As required under paragraph 143 of the framework.
Mr. Keys?
Yeah, thanks, sir. Just coming back on, I'll come back to boundaries in a minute, but just dealing with this local, regional final point on it. So under policy T1 as drafted, you're familiar with the policy, so it has a number of subheadings in it, but of course our station, the Waverley proposed station, is identified under the subheading of city regional level. That's the heading in the policy. So that's part of why I have the position. But But turning back to boundaries, I mean, this is our one chance. You know, the greenbelt boundary gets looked at so infrequently. We need to be sure that, with the best knowledge that we have in front of us all at the moment, that we're setting it the best we can for the future. And I don't know if colleagues across the table have enough knowledge of this scheme and are sufficiently confident to be able to say to you right now, this is how the station will lay out. I'm not sure we're in that position. And so what I'm saying to you, sir, is it might not be possible to put on an ordnance survey map at the moment, a precise boundary, but my view is that we ought to have something in the plan that says there will be the station in this location. And that's in the that's the greenbelt issue, and it's envisaged it will come forward in either in the greenbelt or that the boundary will have to be in a micro sense amended to accommodate it.
Mr. Finnegan-Smith, you obviously talked about the layout. Is that sort of publicly available information, just so I'm sort of clear as to how sort of definite the actual sort of location is for this particular station? So, I obviously, as Mr. Vincent said, obviously, I just need to get an idea what proportion of the actual the greenbelt would be altered or affected, and how that would affect its character, etc.
Thank you, sir. So in terms of whether there is a plan available and published by Rotherham Metropolitan Borough Council, I'm not too sure whether there is at this point. In terms of the work they're undertaking, as I mentioned, it will be the next stage is the outline business case approval that's required. Whether they have published their outline business case as part of that process, we would need to confirm. But that's something that we can check and come back to you, sir, if that would be useful.
Yeah, I think it'd be just useful just to add as an action point, really, just so I'm absolutely sort of clear, as to where the pathway might be for a map that might appear. If it's part of that business plan, then at this stage there isn't a plan available that I'm able to view. So it'd be useful just to add that as an action point. Thank you. Okay, thank you for those contributions on that particular point. I'm just going to cover some of the modifications now. I think that have been put forward. Some have been mentioned, but I'll just go through them. There's obviously a number that have been put in the council's hearing statement and the council's main modification schedule, CD31. So I'm just going to run through those as they stand. So in policy SB1, I think Mr. Finnegan-Smith referred to this one. Obviously, it's relating to adding the Don Valleys. I think it's referenced GC1 in the schedule of main modifications that the council put forward. So it's obviously adding the Don Valley line and including supporting infrastructure to deliver the enhanced rail services to Part J, the third bullet point. Obviously, given the discussions, I think that's effective and would be consistent and justified with basic policy. The next one I picked up just going through the actual supporting text of initially to policy T1. It's GC22. So it's basic paragraph 517. There's an additional bit of text relating to the South Yorkshire Enhanced Bus Partnership. There's an additional bit of text there that's due to be added. I won't read it all out, but again, that's again would be effective and justified, so that can be added again to the main mod schedule. The next one is GC 23. It's a paragraph 518, and this picks up the point about the role of non-standard cycles, which I think came through as a sort of representation, and I think a suggested modification was put in. Again, some additional text that was going to be added. Again, that would be acceptable in terms of a main modification to add to the effectiveness and to cover this particular point. The next one is GC 39, which again in policy is actually within policy T1 now, and it's including the reference to the mobile hubs. It's including mobile hubs to the first paragraph. There's some additional text being added at GC 39. So again, and add to the definition list as well, I think was part of that. So it's additional text relating to the mobile hubs and adding to the definition as to what mobile hubs effectively cover. The next one I've got in the schedule is GC 31, which again is policy T1. It's the city regional level part of the actual policy, and it refers to including sporting infrastructure to deliver the enhanced rail services. It's in the first point, so I think this probably relates back to the aspirations in terms of rail infrastructure. So again, that seems to be effective, so it can be added to the main mod schedule. Again, policy T1 GC3, there was in the section relating to this is the pick up on the city regional level. The third bullet point, add the Kilmarsh to the new list of stations, and then add partly in Rotherham, and then add to a new bullet point, fourth bullet point, reopening of the Don Valley Railway line to the passengers, which obviously picks up on the discussion today. So again, that can be added to the main mod schedule in terms of for consistency with the policy, national policy and effectiveness. The next one is GC 20. Again, it's within policy T1. Add to the city level section a new bullet point prioritising park and ride linked to mass transit corridors and reducing long stay parking elsewhere. And that's for the effectiveness of the plan. I think that's acceptable. And then just one other I've got before I just sort of pick up some of the issues. GC 29, and again it's in policy T1, the final bullet point to the policy, basically again picking up on this issue of the cargo bites. So it's supporting opportunities to utilise more sustainable freight transport movements, including, for example, e-cargo bikes and consolidated hubs. Again, that I think is useful in terms of obviously the effectiveness of the policy. Two or three of them are the main modifications. The first one I've got I've got a few concerns with. In terms of policy T1 as GC 21, there's a reference in policy it's GC 21, so it's paragraph 2 of policy T1. There's a reference to in paragraph 2 to after the South Yorkshire Metropolitan Transport Strategy and the Sheffield Transport Strategy and subsequent replacements. I'll come on to this really. It is obviously there's quite a few references to non-development plan documents within the policy itself. They aren't documents that are effectively being examined as part of the actual this examination. We've got no sort of say over how those plans were dealt with. So in terms of this, in terms of the soundness, if basically they're to consider, they probably need to be moved into supporting text, reference to them, rather than being included within the policy where they've got effectively a higher status in a sort of short term. In the sporting text, I think it's acceptable. So what my suggestion is that in terms of its main modification is to probably not within the policy itself, is basically add that to the sporting text. So in terms of GC 21 and the text relating to the transport strategies that are within that particular paragraph too. In terms of GC 30, which is in policy T1, this refers to it's at the national regional section, 6th bullet point. It says to delete rail links and replace with connectivity. I think that's fine. I think it adds to the effectiveness, but the reference to England, I think it's National Highways England. That's just basically a minor modification. It's not a main modification; it's an additional modification. So it doesn't necessarily need to be put forward as a main modification. So the reference to delete England is something that council would need to probably pick up through their own schedule additional modifications. It's just a name change, effectively, I think, from National Highways, Natural England. So I think that was what I picked up. And then the final one in terms of the council ones that are put forward is in policy T1. It's GC 17. Again, it's the maps 15 and 16. In part 1, add strategic road networks M1 and A616 to maps 15 and 16. Again, it's a map issue. It's an additional modification. It isn't a main modification, so it should be an additional modification to the schedule rather than a main modification. I hope that's clear. If the council want to come back to me on any of those.
Sorry, so can you just repeat what you said about, I think it was GC 30, about with the additional modification and the reference to...
Okay, so I think it needs to be split effectively. The actual within the actual modification, it says 6th bullet point, delete road links and replace with connectivity. That's a main modification.
Yeah.
The subsequent bit and delete England is an additional modification. So that needs to be taken out of the main modification schedule.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got it. Yeah, I've got it.
The only following point, I've also just touched on, there are a number of documents within the actual policy T1. I've mentioned some already. The South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority Transport Strategy, Sheffield Transport Strategy, the Sheffield Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Business Service Improvement Plan 2021, the South Yorkshire Enhanced Plan Partnership, and finally the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority Active Implementation Plan. It's really similar advice that these should be put within the supporting text in terms of the actual, again, these are not documents that have been examined, so these details can be provided in the supporting text as a modification, but I wouldn't recommend them as a main modification I wouldn't recommend them within the actual policy itself, so they should be added as an additional modification, just to remove those and add those to the supporting text. There's obviously a little bit of tinkering, I know, with the policy potentially, but I think unfortunately that's the way obviously we consider the documents or plans, and they can't sit within the policy itself. They should be within the supporting text. Hopefully that's clear. So thank you.
Would it be helpful, sir, if we produced a sort of composite version of that policy which showed the main mods and a sort of a new track change version which showed the main modifications and any additional modifications? We undertook to do something similar to on the policy on blue and green infrastructure. I think it's probably helpful to everybody's understanding of where there are quite a lot of changes.
Yes, I think so. That would be really helpful. Yeah, just to sort of produce. I've obviously you'll use your document, the track change document, CD34 as a sort of as a reference point to make me to help with my understanding of where these the modifications were being put into the plan, to sort of see whether they were effective or met the actual plan tests. But yeah, that would be useful, Mr. Vincent. Yeah, thank you.
So, sorry, just there's one related point, and I don't know really whether it's for you to answer it, because I know you weren't running that session, but in terms of BG1, which is the blue and green infrastructure policy, there was discussion in that session about including reference to an SPD in the text of the policy. I'm assuming, based on what you've just said, that it would be better also to sort of remove that and put it in the reasoned explanation as opposed to the text of the policy. So I just wanted to say that, to flag that up now for consistency, so that when we produce the track changes in respect of that policy, that will appear in the reasoned explanation as opposed to the policy itself.
That's absolutely correct. The reference should be within the supporting text. The SPD, again, because of the reasons I explained. So yeah, again, with that particular policy, if a composite, if there are a number of changes, if a composite policy is being sort of been presented, that would be helpful for our understanding of how it reads. So thank you. Okay, I think I'm more or less at the end now, so I think obviously everyone will be relieved. So I just need to, I won't go through all the modifications I've just been through, so I hope you picked to them, but just to refer back to the ones at the very beginning. So I think just so you're clear, the main modifications, obviously the first one we discussed was just about the definitions for essentially important and supportive categories in terms of the infrastructure sort of policy IM1 and that's to be added to the definition section of the end of the policy. That was clear. And then there were two further main modifications to policy IM1, which was RH1 and RH2, and then obviously the third one was just relating to the South Yorkshire Digital Infrastructure Strategy. Obviously, that should be added, I think, effectively to the supporting text of policy IN1, I think, and also the council suggestion that added to be policy SO3, sorry, in relation to broadband. So those were sort of, I think, the other additional modifications I sort of suggested today, as well as the ones we've just been through. Actions, and obviously in terms of list of actions today, obviously there's the issue of the that was picked up Mr. Waring regarding the SPD, and obviously that's the reference within the plan where that will sit. The transport model, drawing for junction 34, I think we refer to as basically just needing to be added to the examination library. Add, obviously, in terms of our discussion with Mr. Key, obviously it was the map 10 and the policies map reference obviously to Waverley Station, and obviously there was this consideration as to whether a main modification was required in the supporting text to explain about local stations, etc. That was my understanding. And then just the fourth action point was just clarity whether the plan is available for Waverley Station, obviously the layout plan, etc. I think that was the only final. Is there anything additional in terms of action points that the council picked up that would need to just go into the schedule of action points for this session?
No, I don't think there's anything else for us.
That's fine, thank you. I think just to help with our wrap-up session tomorrow, where we'll just go through the schedule of action points. Obviously, it's the end of this week. Obviously, there'll be potentially additional action points, etc., that may fall out of the session tomorrow. But obviously, if we could have basically the schedule, a hard copy of the action list and the main modification provided to the inspectors, so we can just have those available before that final wrap-up session, so we can then review those with the council at the very end of Matter 6 on Greenbelt. That'll be very useful. I think, is there anything else that needs to be raised today on Matter 7 relating to infrastructure and transport? If there isn't, I just let's thank everyone for their contributions today. It's been very helpful. Thank you. Obviously, the next hearing session is tomorrow morning at 9:30. Matter 6 on the Greenbelt. So we shall see you there. Thank you. Bye.